Hi folks, Sean McLean. Going to do a couple of quick tips, a little bit extra about update sets. If you've had one of my classes, I put these out on YouTube as just some extra stuff, or a chance to maybe refresh the things that we talked about with update sets. So one of the first things I wanted to do with regard to that, I'm just going to talk about three things. One, some good practices I like to let people know. Two, a little bit of a what can go wrong, and if something goes wrong, some things that you can do. And three, a little about the application setting in an update set. So I've got a little field here that I built out in an update set, and essentially I built some other things too, but essentially just to show you, if I go to an open incident, you'll see that I added a field. Right, and this field shows that there's a new field from update set, and so what could possibly go wrong? So if I go back to my update set to show the potential for oops, what I'm going to do is as we point out, we mark it complete, and we will do a quick save. Now, as we do also, I always try to point out, this is my opportunity to point out some extra best practices, right? One of the things, of course, would be that we want to name an update set with something that makes sense, follow a convention. Now, this you'll probably get in every class. Should be some convention. Typically, we assign it to the story or the sprint or the work requirement, some convention that all of our update sets are organized around. And we keep that convention. In this case, probably not a great idea. Next on my list of some kind of do's for update sets, in the description field, we should always kind of describe something that we do, a little bit of what we did or why. But the other requirement that I make for people, a recommendation, is to put the accountable person's information and their email. And their phone number, which of course I'm not going to put here on YouTube. But the reason that I want to make sure that this is set up this way, or the reason I point that out as a thing to put in the description, is it makes the person building the update set accountable. Oftentimes for the production side, when we're importing these update sets, if I have someone who's accountable, that's the person that I'm going to call. And if I have that person that I'm going to call, then that person's liable to check a little more carefully to make sure their update set is just right. Now, next on my list of tips and tricks, and probably last, is we should attach in some form the requirement that drove the update set. It doesn't matter to me whether that's an email form, or maybe in some cases people will actually link to the story or the requirement. But one of the other cool things you can do is, if maybe you're using project and portfolio management or Agile, those stories that you have that you'll get from Agile, you can actually export as a PDF or spreadsheet, and you can attach those PDFs. That way, with the update set is a document of the requirement that we brought through. So really, three things. Have a convention, put the accountable person's contact information, and attach the thing that drove the update set in some format. So those are kind of the three tips. Next on the list, though, we're going to take this update set and we're going to save it as complete. And what we're going to do is we're going to move it, we're going to export to XML, and we're going to move it over into a different system. So I'm going to come over into another system and bring it in. And when we bring it in, I want to kind of point to one of the things that might happen. Just to show you what an error would look like. Because errors aren't necessarily things to panic about, right? So I want people to see, what might be the case. Not that we would ever do work in production. But what might be the case if I were to bring in an update set to which I had already updated the system? And in this case, it's taking a little time. So I'm just adding a field that is on this version that is not on the previous. And now I'm going to go to my retrieved update sets. And I'll import that update set that I had just built. Now, when we look at update sets, one of the things we rarely do is recognize that this is just kind of a wrapper. This update set stores all of the different updates that I made to the system. And just by looking at the type and making a habit of reviewing update sets before I actually preview them, making a habit of looking to see what it is I built and seeing if I can read them is rather handy. If I wanted to get really fancy, I might take that so far as to go into the update set and look at the actual record. And if I were to look at the actual record, though it seems, a little overwhelming, if I turn around and say payload XML, you can see this is a very straightforward, again, depending on what kind of familiarity you have, this is a fairly straightforward XML package. And even if I'm not so familiar, I can read in between the brackets and go, okay, this is, it's making a label that's a new field label. There's the actual field in the database. What table is it going to? It's going to the incident table. What's the plural version? So I can kind of see what's going on and where it's going by looking through this. In fact, and though we very rarely talk about this, you could go into the XML package and edit it directly, though I would not recommend that under any circumstances. So I'm going to go back to my update set that I imported into this instance, right? And I'm going to preview. And as I bring it across, oops, when I look at this, it looks very, very intimidating. Big, long red line, it failed at 100%, everything's going to end. But if you look at the update sets in actuality, and you come down to the list to see the errors, they're pretty straightforward. They actually tell you kind of what's there, and they let you do things like compare. So I could click compare and see the differences. And if I look to that compare, I can see where, oh, this was updated, and really what happened was I had one field on my production instance and a different field that I was bringing from the development instance, right? And so it's a pretty simple thing to look at that and go, yeah, that's fixable, right? So to get to this, what I probably would do is come down and look at my choices, and I could skip that one update. Notice that there's many that will come through, but there's one that I have to make a determination of. So in this case, I'm going to accept, and then I'll run the preview again just to make sure, and that seems to, oh, wait, there's more. Found a local update set, so I'll accept remote update, and now I'll commit. And then I'll be able to go into this system and see the other field. So once I see the other field, that kind of brings us through the how you handle errors. Now the errors are different in every case, and in some cases skip is more appropriate. But just understanding that aspect that an error is not an end of the world thing, and understanding some of those good practices might help. There's one other thing I like to do with update sets and to warn people about, and this ties to scopes. Scopes are essentially the wrappers that go around the work that we do. And when we deal with scopes, sometimes we may make updates that are in different scopes accidentally. Now, this is actually harder to do in the current version of ServiceNow than it used to be. If, for example, I were to go into the CAB workbench and look at all CAB definitions and look at a CAB workbench example, I'll get a message that says, hey, this is an error, you're in the wrong package, you're in the wrong scope. So it does tend to warn me of that. But on the off chance that somehow you find a way to actually do work in the wrong place. Now, in this case, a lot of people, they'll tell you to click here. When I do the click here, what happens is the work that I'm doing isn't recorded either in the global update set. In fact, I think it's recorded over, I'm not positive, I think it doesn't show up. So it's not, this is not the best of ideas to do. Instead, you're better off moving to the appropriate update set. And with regard to that, I just want to bring out two other practices. One of the things you can do with the update sets, just in case if you somehow manage to do work in the wrong place, is make a very simple change. And I'll make that change over here on my retrieved update sets. If you look at the overall update set wrapper and the individual update sets, you've got a related list that works just like any other list. If we go over to personalize, or in any case, right click and configure, we can add the field application. An application is really referring to the scope of the update that's coming across. So when I look at an application, what I'm doing is I'm verifying that all of these updates are actually going to be applied to the global scope. And that's what makes sure when I both commit an update set on my system, or when I build an update set in the development system, that the things I'm doing are where I think they are. If you try to bring in an update set from an incorrect, where that management has not happened, I'll see if I can do that. You can find sometimes an error. I will bring. I believe I'm going to try. I think one of these will give me the error that I'm hoping for. And we'll see. Hopefully. Nope. All right. Usually you get an error, and the error reads that the sys ID for the scope does not match. And so you'll see a long string that says sys-id. That's simply an indicator that the work that you did somehow was done in the wrong application scope. And that's easily checkable by adding that application column to your customer updates. So 3 quick extra tips for update sets, just as a thing for people who attend the class and want to see this. If you want to pass it on, that's great. Remember, when building update sets, always attach the work that drove the update set, whether it's a PDF of the story or a PDF of the email or whatever it is. Also make sure in the description that you put the accountable person's name in there, and of course you follow some naming convention. Then element 2, when importing update sets, if you find an error, take the time to read the error and the possible actions. Consider comparing the two, or consider skip or accept. Oftentimes in those errors, there are things that you can parse. So don't panic if you see an update to which there are errors, and recognize you can go through them. And tip 3, when building out update sets, take that extra moment and add the application column to the customer updates. Hope this has been helpful, and we'll go from here.